Okay, first up, sporting codes around the world are returning from lockdown, and their first order of business appears to be to have their sports people take a knee, to kneel down on a moment's reflection at the start of a game, to take a moment's silence as a gesture of solidarity in support of Black Lives Matter. Now, the media don't quite tell the whole story on this. They say that this is all very innocent. It's merely about taking a stand against racial injustice, or it's an anti-racism statement. Well, the truth is that the gesture comes with an explicit endorsement of Black Lives Matter as a movement. There's usually a Black Lives Matter or often a Black Lives Matter banner in the background or hanging around somewhere, and commentators refer to the movement by name. And some sports people are bucking the trend. Major League Baseball player Sam Coonrod stood alone on the field as all his teammates from the San Francisco Giants knelt down. African-American NBA player from Orlando Magic Jonathan Isaacs did the same. The NBA coach Greg Popovich did the same. The biggest display of sort of standing rather than kneeling came from the Formula One, where 6 of 20 F1 drivers didn't take a knee at the recent Austrian GP. I won't go through all their names, but they included former world champion Kimi Räikkönen. And then, of course, most recently, and this made the news, Israel Folau was the only rugby player on the field who opted to take a stand ahead of the Catalans Dragons versus St Helens Super League season opener. Now, Isaacs and Coonrod have both spoken about their decision. Isaacs said the following to the media. He said, I believe that Black Lives Matter. Kneeling while wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt doesn't go hand in hand with supporting black lives. He's obviously referring to the broader implications of the movement. He said, I support black lives, but not in that way. My life has been supported by Jesus Christ. The gospel gives us force. I knew it was going to be a tough decision, one that people would have questioned. I've leaned on God's word and his plan for me. People have opinions, but I took my decision. We're protesting and doing things to get something done, but we need to see all the things and all the answers are in the word of Jesus. Meanwhile, Coonrod, the baseball player, said the following. He said, I'm a Christian, so I just believe that I can't kneel before anything besides God. I just can't get on board with a couple of things that I've read about Black Lives Matter. How they lean toward Marxism, and they've said some negative things about the nuclear family. I just can't get on board with that. Then you've got Russian F1 driver Daniil Kvyat, I hope I've got that right, also commented as follows, and most of the F1 drivers didn't say anything, but he said, unfortunately, the gesture of going on the knee is against the mentality of my country, where you only go on the knees in front of God and your flag, and that's it. Folau has not spoken publicly about his decision. Now, it's noteworthy that those with the courage to take a stand, and it does take courage and conviction, particularly in Folau's case, for whom the stakes are high, they tend to be Christians. And it turns out that the Christians in these groups tend to be those who, in the eyes of many, have disappointingly firm convictions. There's been quite a lot of criticism levelled against some of these people and a lot of media storm. They're not easily swayed by the social movements of the day, and their convictions are rooted in their desire to serve God rather than people. And you might well ask, well, what is it about an anti-racism statement that could possibly conflict with honouring God? The question at first makes a lot of sense because God made the entire human race and Christ died for people of every tribe and tongue and nation, as the Bible says, and God hates the sin of partiality, which is what racism is, amongst other things like hatred, for example. And if that is what Black Lives Matter stood for and that is all, there would be, of course, no concern. But it stands for things which are really quite different. And I've handled this issue at length. If you want to see my comprehensive treatment of Black Lives Matter as a movement, search Black Lives Matter on ACL's YouTube channel or my YouTube channel. You'll find the materials there. But for present purposes, I'll make these points. First of all, they are Marxists. That's not me saying that. One of the founders, Patrisse Cullors, was very clear on an interview with TheRealNews.com where she said, we have an ideological framework and that is Marxism. She then goes on to say that phrase, Black Lives Matter, is not actually just a statement of supporting black lives. She said that's not what it really means. It's not Black Lives Matter. It's actually a statement of politics. It's a statement which encompasses the broader political movement, which is the Marxist objectives and the Marxist umbrella in which Black Lives Matter exists and the political movement that it actually is. Now you drill down into some more specific things like their public comments, but especially their What We Believe statement, which is on their own website, and you start to glean some more things. Firstly, as Sam Coonrod said, they denounce the nuclear family. They are opposed to men and to maleness. Now, that's extraordinary. If you are into the welfare of the African American community, it's astounding to me that you would say where there is an absolute crisis of family breakdown, where you have fatherlessness at epidemic rates. There's some communities where 70+% of children are born without a father. I was listening to an African American Christian pastor, Vodi Borkham, the other day, and he said when he was growing up, he said he didn't know that people had fathers. To live in a house with a dad wasn't a thing. I mean, that's how serious it is. And they say they're against men and they're against the nuclear family. Really astonishing. Also, they're totally pro-abortion, despite the fact that African American babies are aborted at a disproportionately high rate. And there's parts like, I think, New York City or New York State where I think more black babies are aborted than born alive. Astonishing. They're queer affirmative, they're trans affirmative, they're anti-Christian, they're anarchistic and revolutionary. And of course they are, because all Marxist organisations are. The Communist Manifesto says that it's about the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions, which is ultimately what these revolutionary movements are about. And they're opposed in these ways and others to God's good things. Their ideological frame means that they not only wrongly solve a problem, but they wrongly diagnose a problem. They say, well, police are racists. Well, actually, police are people like you and me, and most people like you and me are not racists and don't want and actually hate racism. And it's a movement, therefore, that's rotten, root and branch. It's not like there's salvageable bits. It is almost really a false gospel. It's got toxic foundation and toxic fruits. And so the Christian approach to this is therefore quite obvious for those who know, for those who have done their research. When asked to take a knee to lend solidarity and authority and power to a political movement of this nature, the Christian has to say no. As the Apostle Paul says, how can right and wrong be partners? How can light and darkness live together? How can Christ and the devil agree? Now, Jesus gives the Christian two jobs to do as we live in this world. The first is to be salt, and the second is to be light. And the important one, and that's what these sports players are doing, by the way, they're in the world, they're in the public eye, they are in the public squares when they stand on the field and when they are a testimony of their faith. And so they have that opportunity to be in the world, and that's where the salt and light command becomes relevant. But you know, the one that's particularly applicable here in the present circumstances, I think, is the command to be salt. And what that really tells us is, like salt, you know, to preserve meat, you know, when you scatter it on meat, and that's what they used to do to preserve it, it really is a metaphor to say that your presence as a Christian in the world, it acts like salt. It stops the decay. It stops the advance of decaying forces like evil. That's why it's so important for Christians to stand firm on what is right and to fight for what is right, because we are to be salt and we are to stop the decaying influence, the destructive forces of evil. But here's the key. You know, when Jesus says that you're the salt of the earth, he then goes on and says, you know, salt that's lost its taste is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. And I find that very interesting. He's saying, don't lose your taste. Well, how does salt lose its taste? How does it lose its flavour? The main way, actually, is that the moisture seeps into it and corrupts it and makes it useless. That means that the environment in which it's been sitting has influenced it, has crept in. And you know, to be effective salt, the lesson is this: don't be compromised by your environment. Don't let the moisture in, because there's always pressure. There's always pressure to compromise. You think of even people in the Bible like Daniel. I'm sure the pressure just to let it go and pick another battle, and it's not that bad, and it all would have been there. The pressure to compromise your character, to change aspects of what you believe and how you behave, and the pressure to compromise in your actions. They're both there, and they come against us very powerfully. And you can think of these sports stars as classic examples, under pressure. But the lesson is this: don't change in the face of those external pressures. Don't let them seep in and compromise. Because the lesson of the salt is that our difference makes the difference. There's many people out there who would take the false approach and say, no, there's a superficial way to do this, which is to fall into the trap of thinking that our conformity will make the difference, because somehow that's friendlier or somehow that's more something. I don't know. It's a softer, weaker approach. No, that's not right. Our difference makes the difference. And you can see it straight away. You know, I posted about the Folau thing on social media, and you see what influence that man now has on people. He gives them courage. Billy Graham said, you know, when one courageous man takes a stand, the spines of others are often stiffened. And that courage, which is contagious, is collective, and it stops the total domination of a movement that is opposed to God's good things. It makes people think twice. It stands as a testimony to something different. And it's something that God can use because it is faithful to God. That's what it means to be salt, making a difference through refusing to compromise, stopping that decay. And that's a really good thing to do in the world. It is Jesus' command, and it applies to our character and it applies to our action. Now, before I close this off, let me say this: as for racism, I've said it many times, I'll say it again, we bow the knee to Jesus Christ, who made all, regardless of who they are, who died for all, who saves all, and rules a kingdom of souls from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. It is the greatest racial harmony in the world. Hey guys, make sure you click like to like the video, or hit the subscribe button down here and click on the bell so you don't miss any notifications. And to watch more videos, just click here. Cheers. Go on, click one. You know you want to.